Hello, hello everyone. Hello Yan, how are you? Hello Joe. Hello Yan, how are you? Hello Joe. Yep, for the online attendees, thanks for attending in such a time, and because this is our very first live streaming, so still a little bit technical issues need to be overcome. Um, Technically, I'm looking at you guys will have about 30 to 45 seconds delay, so which means you will probably have a minute or 90 seconds round trip if I'm talking, you asking the questions. Let's get started. We have hi Nida. How are you? Finally, we have you. Because of the today's session is a online live session. I think the real demo experience will be not that good. So I will probably do a recorded demo and post it on the website on the YouTube channel later. So stay tuned. Oh, someone said just so is everything all right? Just make sure. Okay, let's get started. Azure policies. Cool. Yeah, as I expected, everyone should have 30 seconds delay. I'm currently streaming using my ADSL, hopefully ADSL speed. It's not that good, but I will try my best. Okay, let's get started. Azure policies. Why we choose this topic for all the new people to our meetup groups and older folks to our meetups groups. So first of all, thanks for attending in such a time, and hopefully you grab your beer and snacks from your kitchen, because we used to provide beers and snacks. Have a rest. Let's see how the Azure policies gonna help you to change your life, especially for these system admins, to make your life easier. Okay, so today's agenda, so we will quickly go through the Azure governance features that's not limited to Azure policy, but we will focus on the Azure policy in the remaining session. Then we will introduce a very important idea or framework, which is the Azure Policy Lifecycle Management. That including from the very beginning of how do you compose your policy to how do you retire to the end of the life cycle of a policy, which is you retire a policy. Then we quickly have a look of the policy as code implementation workflow. Basically, how do you compose your policies in VS Code, and how do you eventually publish your policies? I would say if you cannot get a decent demo here, I will probably record a very clear version of the demo and post it on the YouTube after this session. So don't worry too much about the demo, live demo. Stay tuned. I will basically post it everything later. So far, just make sure everyone can hear me clearly. We have 6 people in the chat room, so everyone say okay. Right, let's move on to see how traditional approach becomes a roadblocker in the entire cloud adoption or continuous deployment and automation way. So traditionally, we have developers on the left side. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Nida. Thanks, Joe. We have developers. We have operators. BAU people is trying to do something. Usually, while they are trying to do something, they will go through a gate. The gate usually to be a CAB or a cloud engineer who take the total ownership of the cloud environment. By doing so, usually we slow things down pretty much a day or two, sometimes even a week. This basically blocked the whole DevOps chain. Basically, the idea of DevOps is make work flow. So if there is something, stop the work from flowing from one end to the other, that's not good. So we don't want such delays. So Microsoft introduced all of these governance framework and governance features to help the people to remove the roadblock in the middle, which is the cloud man. By doing so, what we call is a cloud native mindset. Basically, it's removing the barrier, accelerate the velocity, accelerated the deployment speed by moving the cloud engineer to the right end. And cloud basically sits in the middle, and it's transparent to both parties. So by doing that, we will keep the cadence and accelerate the speed, but at the same time, it will remain control. So how Microsoft provide all of these capabilities to the end user? They are pretty much 5 capabilities. One is management group, basically is helping the customer to organize the resources and subscription in a very efficient way, and also helping the customer to have a delegation hierarchies. And no doubt the core of everything in the middle is the policies, which gives the user or DevOps team a guide rails and confident that they can put things to the Azure without any barrier, but still secure and safely, and they're not going to blow away all the costs. And then the next function is no doubt the Azure Blueprint, which is a combination of pre-canned ARM templates, role-based access controls, and a set of policies or initiatives. These 3 things are mainly the technical features that provided by Microsoft to the Azure platform as a governance feature. The last one is the cost management, which should be used by all the users, all the developers, all the operators, finance people, to give everyone a visibility of what has been consumed in the cloud. So all of these three things is the Microsoft Cloud Governance portfolio of features. There are a few new things like a resource graph has been introduced to increase the visibility of the cloud, which is another topic we can cover in the later, which provided the customer the capability to do the comparison of pre-change and after change, what resource features has been modified. So if you using the Azure very frequently, you will notice there is a change history tab in the Azure event. So this basically powered by the resource graph. So we can have that conversation later. But today we definitely focus on the policy, the Azure policy. It is a real-time, as per Microsoft, it's a real-time enforcement and compliance assessment and the remediation capabilities for Azure. And now Microsoft also extend the policy capability to beyond Azure. There is a new feature called host configuration using the Azure policy. Literally, we can treat that as a Azure policy to be used to replace the traditional group policy. So which means we can use the Azure policy to configure the VMs in Azure and on-premises. So that's another big topic. If anyone has interest, just raise your hand. We can cover that in maybe the next two sessions. That is a really, really new feature, but it's very, very powerful. We can see Microsoft is definitely trying to decommission the group policy and on-premises. It is very, 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 very hard. They're working on that. So all of these we can see management group, blueprint, cost management, but everything is in the center is the Azure policy. So management group can leveraging policy to reinforce the management principles at different management group level. And the blueprint basically is a bunch of artifacts. One of the important artifacts is Azure policies, and the resource graph and the cost management can utilize the Azure policy to reinforce certain rules or creating the cost alerts using the Azure policy. So Azure policy is very, very important. As per our experience, there's not many customers start using that, but the Microsoft has already provided us a very robust Azure policy portfolios out of the box. There are about 1,100 built-in policies now out of box in Azure. So very, very rich existing portfolio, much more rich than the group of policies. So start using that, have a look of it. It's not that difficult. It's very, very straightforward. Okay, so this is the Azure policy. See, let's have a look of how these governance features put into place to helping us to reinforce all these management principles. We can see Azure Policy Engine, which is the very, very core thing, sit together with the Azure Resource Manager. So which means the Azure Resource Manager, so every time, because currently when you're provisioning or modifying or access Azure, so all your request is going through the Azure ARM engine. So which means you have no way to avoid any policy reinforcement. But on the other hand, that makes us a very, very difficult to remediate the existing environment, because the Azure Policy Engine will only be kicked in when you queued something into the Azure ARM template engine. So Azure ARM engine, so any existing, for example, you have a VM, you have a storage account, you have a key vault, you want to enable something using the Azure policy, it's very, very difficult because you cannot kick in again the Azure ARM template engine to run that policy. So that is why Microsoft introduced the Azure Policy Remediation task to remediate the existing environment. But so that is, we also trying to tell the users that do the policy as early as possible, because if you want to retrospectively fix or remediate any non-compliance problem, it will sometimes takes way much longer than you expected before. To do anything else.对呀，妈妈我好过弄吗？是吧？ Hello. Okay. I hope I get the poor network connectivity. The audio should come back quickly. I'm just talking about the Azure Policy Engine. Cool. Thank you. The Azure Policy Engine will sit with the ARM template and will be kicked in anytime when you start provisioning things. And you can also have a little bit difficult to remediate stuffs because that you cannot re-kicking the policy engine to do something.是吧？我好啦。哦，好啊，好啊。爹哋嚟开会，侬叫妈妈帮侬弄，好吧？侬等特些好吧？咁么侬就先白相些别个么子好吧？ Okay, let's move on. So, any questions around the policy engine? Because we this is very key part. We need to have a fully understand of when the policy will be kicked in, and it's not like a group policy that once you push to the environment, once you push down to all the workstations, servers, they will doing the remediation. Basically, it's act like as a desired status configuration. But the policy engine usually they only do compliance assessment and run it once when the resource the ARM engine was kicked in. So it won't do any remediation automatically unless you told it so. Okay. So then the next we understand what the policy looks like, and let me see. Where is my subscription? Here we go. Okay, so Any questions? All good? No question? We can see here, this is the Azure portal. Once you log in, definitely you find the Azure policies. This example, let me see for the Azure policies will be okay. So let's have a quick look of the how do you basically from basic steps, how do you start to creating the Azure policy. So there are basically two type of activities you will need to do. So one is definition, which is the step you create a policy, but it won't straight away to be affected to your environment until you start assigning any of these policies to your environment. So we can see here, these are some Microsoft built-in policies plus some initiatives. Or we just say policies. There are large amount of Azure policies being published by Microsoft. So any one of you can start using that from now on. So very, very useful, very, very helpful. One of the few things I want to call out is tagging, because many people is concerning about that inherited tagging from the resource group is a very difficult thing. So Microsoft provide such Azure policies for all of the users to be able to enable to inherit the tags from resource groups and subscriptions as well. So these are the two no-brainer. I would recommend customers to every one of you to start using that straight away from now on. So that is basically helping you to push down the taggings, makes your environment is nice and clean. So let's have a quick look of the definition language. Thank you. Yeah, hopefully that will be very helpful. Hopefully that will be helpful. Basically, the definition is also a JSON based. It's a little bit not that human friendly, but it's a system friendly language. Two major sections we need to fill in. The first is the properties. The second is the policy rule. While you define a policy, so you need to define the policy properties. Basically, it's policy name, policy type, it's a built-in or customized, and give it a little bit description. And you can also versioning by using the metadata information. Parameters is basically exactly the same as how do you when you define the ARM template. It's basically give it the parameter name, type, metadata, and the policy rules. Policy rules is a very traditional if-then statement in most of the programming language. Is very, very common. One of the very important thing is the effect keyword. The effect keyword basically help the users to define what's the action when a if statement is or if condition was met. So there are a few different things. One of the very, very important effect is called is do if not exist. So with do if not exist, for example, this is a policy will automatically remediate your environment. For example, here I have a policy called deploy a dependency agent for Windows VM. So the effort is deploy if not exists. So which means if this if statement is met, then the system gonna to do something, which is basically push the ARM template in the detail section and deploy all of these things to the resources which this policy being assigned to. So this is very, very helpful to do automated deployment, especially around some basic things for VM configurations. For example, PaaS services configurations, enable the SQL, some security options, and push the network security group to the VM. All of these things, basically, as long as you can do it in the ARM template, you can use the effort deploy if not exists to that target resources. So have a look at all of these definitions. The definition syntax. Get familiar with it. You don't necessarily need to compose everything from the scratch. We will show later there should be some workflows or existing template in the VS Code. We can start from there, or either we can duplicate from one of the definitions, make it your own. So that is how I made a derived version from the Microsoft building, but create my own. It's my updated version. It's a customized type. It's not a Microsoft building. So once we finish the definition of a policy, it's like a group of policy. You're not automatically associate that group of policy with any OUs, organization unit. You're not applying that group policy. The next step is doing a assignment, which means you assign a policy to a certain scope. The scope can be a subscription, can be a management group, or even can be a lower resource group level. So you cannot assign a policy at resource level. The minimum you can assign is at resource group level. And you can also, if you assign in a higher level, you can also exclude something underneath that. And definitely you need to select a policy definition and give a description. And you can also disable the reinforcement at the very beginning, just to make this policy, for example, the policy has some deny rules. It will not start denying things, but will give you the compliance report to show you how many non-compliant resources is discovered until you reinforce this policy. So it is with very, very good discovery capability for you to develop the customer behavior. For example, when you start to trying to reinforce a location policy, say you are only allowed to provisioning the resources in the pre-approved locations, you can start enable these policies by not enforce it. So the system will only generate the report saying, yeah, these are the non-compliance resources being discovered, for example, overnight. Then you can start gradually sending these reports to the corresponding team, saying, yep, you're not provisioning your resource in a desired region. Please do follow the policies in the future. Then you will discover less and less people start provisioning the resources in the non-preferred region. Once you got the majority people buying or develop such behavior, you can start to flip the switch to the enable mode, which means the system will hard stop everything from provisioning from there on. So which is a very, very good feature for adopting the Azure policy. Start observing, start discovering, start seeing people's behavior and change their behavior gradually instead of give a very hard cut overnight. Then if the policy have some parameters you need to input, for example, when you deploy when you start to reinforce the locations, you definitely will have your locations as a parameter for allowed locations or denied locations. And you can also create a automatic remediation task for the policy to kick in. This, I would say, this is sometimes a little bit of risky activity. We not recommend to do that until it's a very safe way. For example, you want to muck around the tag, that's fine. You can do that. But something really dodgy or something really critical configurations, we not recommend to do a automatic remediation task until you fully understand what you're doing. So then click next and create. So that will definitely finish the association a policy with a scope, which is your targeted resources, and start having all these compliance report generated after 15 minutes. So now one thing I need to call out is the current policy compliance or policy compliance check. It's a regularly, but it's not as real time as we used to have in the group policy. So you won't get immediate result as soon as you apply the assign the Azure policy. It will take some time, maximum 15 minutes. And also, if the system detecting any non-compliance resources in the environment, it won't reflect straight away on the compliance report. It will take approximately 30 minutes to pop up. So don't treat these kind of compliance report as a security feature, because it's not meant to do that. So that's the thing I want to call out. Sometimes I've heard a customer saying, yeah, oh, you have the compliance report. Yes, we use that as a security monitoring feature. Don't use that because it's not real time. No, it's near real time, but it's not real time at all. So once you have these compliance, it will tell you what activity the compliance did. So we have few deployment, if not exist, policy be kicked in, which is very, very good, because I provisioned a few VMs these days. These automatic jobs being kicked in, and this is the change history I mentioned to you earlier. Is now the resource graph can give you the post and before status of the policy. So it will show you what has been changed and highlight it here. So which means obviously something has because I deployed the agent to the disk, so the provisioning status is created from success. Literally, I just deployed the VM extensions. Cool. So that's basically the overview of how to apply the policy. Very, very easy, Very, very straightforward. Define the policy, then assign the policy. So any questions? Oh, cool. And right, once we get a basic understanding of the Azure policy, we will definitely start to use the policy. So the Azure portal is a good place to start with. But once we want to scale out more policies, if we manage hundreds of the Azure policies in the environment, which is a very, very common situation. So you'll have roughly 100 policies, because this policy definition is quite granular. You'll have huge amount of policies. So we definitely need a proper management process or a quicker way to either deploy, compose, and also retire and assess the compliance of the Azure policies. So this is the Microsoft preferred lifecycle management model for Azure policy. I would think the first thing is very, very important is observe the gaps. So what does that mean? So observe the gaps, which means you need to identify what is the MVP product for your Azure policy to be implemented in the first place. So applying a policy is a ongoing activities. It's not saying you applied once in a big project and you are done with it, because the Azure is updating and releasing new features every other day. You need to have new policies to be able to catch up all these changes. So it's an ongoing activities. So that is why the entire model is a circling model. So identify the initial gap is very, very difficult, because that's the big chunk of gap you need to identify. So afterwards, you just identify a small gap and keep catching up. So where is these the observes or gaps can be identified? Usually, primarily it's from regulatory compliance. For example, the Azure policy can give you a for example, PCI DSS compliance reporting. All of these Azure policies you need to apply to meet the PCI DSS compliance. Or some of the news blogs, Microsoft Azure blogs, to give you the best practices guidelines. For example, as I mentioned earlier, you need to enable the tagging policies. All of these things are not enabled out of box. So you need to enable these tagging policies, cost management policies, all these automated agent deployment policies for Azure monitoring. So all of these come from the best practices. So you need to identify that. And some of the things come from the internal team's recommendation, saying, I have a senior engineer or I have a senior developer saying this specific reserved instance has been purchased, and we need to lock down the SKU for these VMs to only D2 or DSV2 version SKU. Then we can leveraging maximum of our pre-purchased reserved instance. Cool, that's from the internal team's recommendation. And the last thing is definitely from the built-in policies. Go through all the built-in policies, because it will gives you some idea of what you need to enable. And Microsoft also have a GitHub website, which is Azure Policy GitHub. This GitHub repository give you whole lot of resources or predefined policies and some ongoing policies building references of how can you do that, and some patterns of the Azure resource. So this is the Microsoft official Azure policy examples that you need to follow at GitHub. So all of these and anything from the Microsoft internal recommendation tech community. So this is the way, and Microsoft CAF Cloud Adoption Framework is the source for you to identify the gaps. Once you have all these requirements, all these gaps, you can start small, a very MVP. So start reinforce the tag today and carry on to implement more. For example, enable the soft delete function for key vault. It's a little bit tricky one, so don't do that at day one. I would say until you absolutely master the Azure policy, don't touch key vault. Sometimes you will screw it up, per my experience. Then that's basically something you can leverage in. For example, the security centers in Azure Security Center, guest configuration baseline, key vault, NSG roles, AKS engine, RBAC assignment, and all these regulatory compliance PCI I mentioned, and NIST, and all these taggings, resource standard, allowed location naming convention, backup VMs, allowed image for AKS, and cost, allowed VM SKU, as I mentioned, allowed storage SKUs. So these are the very basic starting point you can start with. Have a look at these, see whether you already applied these things or not. Especially around the RBAC role assignment, I think I need to point out one thing is the Azure policy is not meant to be used to assign RBAC roles. The Azure policy primarily is designed for defined resource configurations, not doing the actual role assignment. For example, this is the case. So you can define the Azure policy saying there's no owner role is allowed for this subscription. So this is the role you can design. You can define in the policy. But there's another role you cannot define is I only allow person 1, 2, 3, A, B, C to be assigned owner in this subscription. That is something you cannot define because that's definitely the detailed role assignment. Let's leave it to the RBAC. But at the policy level, you can define a policy saying no one is allowed to be assigned as owner of this subscription. Okay. Then once you start to you identify the gaps, you'll definitely start authoring your customized policy. Because as I mentioned earlier, all the policies is based on the JSON format and the parameter definition, saying this specific parameter, I want it to be a desired status like this. And how do you find all of these system alias? So Microsoft published the Azure resources with alias to point out its parameters or resources. It's like a Swagger API specification. So everything come with the RESTful will come with a Swagger. If you find out anything is not in the Swagger, 99% of the case is Microsoft forgot that. So you can raise a ticket for that. How do you actually have that reference things in the backend? How do you find, for example, I want to define all these log analytics space parameter, for example, the price tier parameter always equal to pay as you go. How do you do that? If you don't know the alias, you cannot do that, right? So Microsoft does provide such workflow tools in the Azure VS Code, which is called Azure Policy Plugin. So you will have to install that once you start doing the policy as code composing. Okay, and I will need to sign in my Azure account. Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. Now we have the Azure policy be installed. I have assigned to log in to my Azure tenant. I should close it, reopen it. Right, see, here is the system that will load all my resources from my Azure subscriptions and the resource providers. And give you all the alias. You can copy that JSON parameter. This is basically the alias of Azure resources. Then you can define the provisioning. For example, you can define these. That's a base churn. Let me put a relatively easiest thing. A VM saying it's, for example, the OS type should always be Windows. So, but you cannot define in a JSON format. So you need to find this alias and define in the if statement if Microsoft computer / virtual machine / storage profile.os disk.os type, this alias not equal to Windows, I will do something else. Then do something else or deny or whatever reason and whatever error message. So this is the thing you need to install, then find out the alias for yourself. And this is the alias. And now Microsoft also give you the opportunity to review your policy definitions or editing your policy definitions from Azure. So now you can't delete editing that. Microsoft is about to release the capability in VS Code for you to compose a policy. It's coming soon. Now you can only determine the resource properties and finding the alias using the Azure VS Code Azure policy extensions. Okay. So once you compose a policy, what you need to do is test this policy. So one of the only way currently we can test the policy is using the enforcement mode to switch it to fourth, and then the policy will do the just raise the non-compliance things. But Microsoft will release a function called what if testing in the deployment pipeline, which is definitely come with the PowerShell for everybody to be able to quickly testing the policy. So once that, we need to deploy the Azure policy using either the UI or either using the PowerShell stuff, and using the PowerShell commandlet and the Azure DevOps. Definitely you can use the Azure DevOps to create a pipeline to deploy that. But unfortunately, using the Azure DevOps pipeline to deploy Azure policy, there's no task associated with that. What do I mean? That is, where is this one? Okay. So, okay. I should stop this. I'm creating too much math for myself. What do I mean? That is, okay. Okay, let's do this. Let's leave it here. So you can add a task, but for most of people, we know that we can use the Azure Resource Group deployment to deploy a ARM template straight away. But for the Azure policy deployment, you cannot use this. You have to use a PowerShell to deploy your environment. And Microsoft does provide a pre-canned PowerShell script that you can define your pipeline using batch create policy PowerShell, and you basically create 3 PowerShell deployment tasks. One is creating the policy, the second one is creating the initiative, then the last one is assign the policies. All of these 3 tasks altogether will give you the capability of batchly deployment a policy to your environment. Currently, you cannot use for example, a existing task. For example, there's no Azure policy task to be able to. This is the task for you to. It's not Microsoft one, so I'm not recommending using that. So Microsoft doesn't provide any of this. This is basically how you deploy that. The thing I'm just making myself a little bit tricky is you can also use the policy compliance as a pre-deployment gate in your pipeline to define if the policy is not compliant, you will not deploy this pipeline. So, which is very, very, very useful. So in the pipeline, if you have such thing being defined, you will see every 5 minutes, you name it, the system will check the policy compliance. If you have ARM template, because in this one, I just have a blank one, because definitely it will not go through anything. But if you have ARM template, it will check the ARM template whether it's compliance to the Azure policy or not. It will only deploy it as soon as it made compliance. You will see a red tick over here every 5 minutes. So this is a very, very useful feature. It's basically a joint effort between your deployment pipeline and your Azure policy. So what is the ideal policy as a code release? That is what I just said. So create a policy definition, create an initiative definition. Initiative is a set of the policy. For example, you got an initiative called PCI compliance, that including about hundreds of different policies. Basically, it's a kind of a folder that group everything all together. Then you test it by enforcement. At this point, you can only do that. Very, very soon we will see what if capability. Then check the compliance status. If everything is all right, then you move on, either do the remediation or either just the deployment assignment mode to enable. So the policy working folder, how do you organize your folder? Because that specific Microsoft PowerShell script requires a certain rule of the folder to be structured in this way. So at the root level, you name it as policies, and then you create a subfolder called policies one. So you name it as a policy. You don't necessarily need to name it as a policy one. So you can name it allow locations. Then you create a JSON file, which is literally your policy definition and your parameter for your policy definition. The policy.rules.json is optional. You don't necessarily need that. And then you can create different environment parameters for you to deploy into different environments. This is basically your policy folder structure. You can put into your any source code repo, your Git repo, your Azure DevOps repo, and GitHub repo as well. And this is your initiatives working folder structure, quite similar. So it's a policy set. So once you have the policy set, before you have the policy set, you must have all these policies being defined. So that is why in the code pipeline, release pipeline, is create the policy definition first, and then create initiatives then. So once you have all of these, you need to go to the Azure Portal Compliance. To see what the compliance number is. Currently, this compliance number cannot be exported. So Microsoft is definitely working on to enable the users to export all these compliance data either into the Azure Security Center or either maybe later in the Azure Sentinel to be able to create some alert or automatic job to be able to be kicked in. So this is something Microsoft will do in the future. For example, now something has already been completed. For example, using the Azure Lighthouse to manage multiple tenants as Azure policy, and you can have more language improvement or modify effort that has already been realized. And some of the content level policies, which means, for example, it can manipulate the secrets and the keys in the key vault, which is the content level, and also leveraging the Azure Arc to be able to expand the Azure policies capability to the on-premises and other cloud platforms as well. So this is something Microsoft is doing, which is really, really exciting to everyone. And that is pretty much everything I want to cover in today's session. Oh, cool. Right timing, 1 hour 45 minutes. Any questions, please raise in either under this video. I will basically post this video right after this session. Everybody can review these, replay this recorded session, and I will basically also do few demos videos for you guys. Just make sure I'm clearly covered everything, including how do you define your pipeline, how do you do the release, because that's something we definitely need to take into the consideration. Cool. Question time. Okay, yeah, I'll be stay online for a while, so don't don't be shy to raise the question in the forum, or either leave your question in the meetup groups. Yeah, and click the button to subscribe this channel, and I'll post more. All right, thanks everyone to attend today's live session. This is our first one. I will say it's a success. In the future, we will definitely post more. Thanks for your time, and have a good evening, everyone. Stay safe.